A listener says the last time Jeremy Guscott was on your programme 2 years ago, he told you that Ireland would win that weekend, and then in the BBC before the match he had no doubts that England would win.
That's the life of a pundit. You can, I swap and change with the wind. It's like I am the weather at the coast. 1 minute it's blowing this way, the next to the other.
Jeremy Guscott is with us with Paul Wallace. We'll be having the Guinness Rugby conversation after we have the news headlines with Richard Chambers.
The Last Word with Matt Cooper.
Text 53102.
It's the Guinness Rugby conversation. Paul Wallace is here with his former British and Irish Lions teammate Jeremy Guscott. Jeremy, thank you for joining us. The last time you were with us 2 years ago, England were going for the Grand Slam and you were highly confident, if I remember correctly. And then Ireland milled England in Lancaster Road 24-8. But aren't you a better team this time? And aren't you in a better situation coming in? You've beaten the All Blacks, new young team, and you don't have the pressure of a Grand Slam coming up on this particular match. So aren't you in a better position perhaps to win?
I wouldn't necessarily agree. I think any side that's going for a Grand Slam has done the groundwork, so people recognise that their forwards are good, their backs are good, or they've got a great kicker. This time, because of the results, particularly against the All Blacks, the expectation goes up. I don't think there'll be too many Irish people that afraid of the Irish team when you of the English team when you look at it man for man. Collectively, I think they're reasonably strong, but they're so inexperienced. And if Tuolangi, who is the man of the English side, who can make a difference, who is the X factor, if he's not in the side, then I think Ireland will be even more confident. But Ireland haven't got anything massively to fear because this side has only beaten the All Blacks. What's it done apart from that?
Yeah, well, that's something Ireland can't do, beat the All Blacks.
There's a lot of teams that can't beat the All Blacks.
Ireland lost to the All Blacks 60-0 last year.
But if it was as easy as that, we'd all be able to predict a win, and it would be all so simple. But the beauty of sport is it is unpredictable. What we think's going to happen doesn't always materialise.
And you have the goal kicker. Owen Farrell seemingly can't miss at present.
Well, if it was down to penalties and kickers, Ireland committed so many penalties last week against Wales in their own half. And I think Ireland committed 15 penalties, 12 of which were in their own half. Now, if they do that against England on Sunday, they're going to give England a head start that not even Ireland would be able to come back from. So they have to really look at that.
So, Paul Wallace, do you think could we start calling England favourites for this game on the basis of what we've seen in the last few matches?
Jerry got it right there about leadership. You look at the leadership and the experience to the Irish side. Word on the street is that Tuolangi won't be available. I thought he would be the X factor if he was to play for them. You also think about the discipline, but Ireland, I think we're so far ahead. It always gets into referees' heads.
I knew you'd have an excuse.
When you're going backwards. I always did, Jerry. Always did.
Prop forwards always got an excuse for something.
When you're going backwards.
And never in the wrong either.
No.
Who would argue with them? You'd always lose the fight.
I'll get a word in somehow. when you are that far ahead, referees tend to give decisions subconsciously to the other side, and they're on the back foot at 14 players and that. But you're right, they do need to tighten up in that area because it's not going to be a game of tries. There might be one or two, but it's not going to be the Irish-Welsh game.
Is the forecast really bad, is it?
Well, it doesn't matter even if it's sunny from now on. I think the Kidderminster are going to be bad. I think
the
other thing as well
didn't look great during the Soccer International last night either.
Yeah, and the other thing is with England, what have they done away from home? They're on a run of 2 good games against the All Blacks in Scotland, and away from home, that's where you really test your mettle. I think Farrell, in fairness, has really come through since he played a Saracens game against Racing, and he's really, really improved. And
that was his 10 out of 10, I think, or 11.
Yeah, something like that.
It was beautiful kicking.
When they were completely outplayed, which just showed his temperament. But he's still a kid compared to Johnny Wilkinson.
Indeed, but also Brian O'Driscoll did say this week that when they looked back at the video of the Ireland-Wales game, they did realise that the performance in the second half, all the penalties they'd given away, that if they did perform that against England, they would not win.
Yeah, well, I think more so the penalty, it was the way that Wales dictated the game, a loose kicking game. I think you also have to say that Wales played some great rugby in that second half for a team that were absolutely, a lot of sides would have went into their shells, and the character of the Welsh team, I think, to fight back. They played some really good rugby and it was real bodies on the line. But I was actually impressed with the Irish defence and how it kept its structures together. And I just thought it was some really, really good Welsh play.
Paul, there's a listener here suggesting it was a team of sick All Blacks that England beat. Is that a bit unfair to England?
But at least the All Blacks came out with their excuses before the match this time around. Not like in 95 and afterwards. I think they learned their lesson from the 95 World Cup.
I think the All Blacks are, the best, the number one side in the world. And after that England game back in the autumn, Hansen even came out and said, "Look, we're not going to blame it on the illness. We're not going to blame it on a bad All Blacks performance. We're going to I'm pretty sure he said this. They did an All Blacks. on us. And I don't think you can get any bigger compliment. But we have to forget about that game. It's great to talk about it, but that's so far in history, back in history now, that all that matters is these two sides. The one who wins is still on for the Grand Slam.
Tell us about Stuart Lancaster, the coach, and what he's brought to the England team, because he replaced an icon in Martin Johnson, who had been, of course, the most successful World Cup winning captain and of whom so much was expected of as manager. What has Lancaster done differently?
Well, I think Wally and myself would be surprised, being ex-internationals, that Lancaster had to rip it right back and actually explain to the English players that, do you know how lucky, do you know how privileged you are to play for your country? Do you know how valuable this shirt with the red rose is? And you've been taking it for granted. You've been behaving appallingly off the field. Your performances on it haven't been fantastic. So he's had to strip it right back and tell these professional rugby players what it means and what it should mean, and the responsibility that you have to your supporters, to your fellow colleagues. I mean, for one instance, he got some of the parents, some of the old school teachers, some of their friends to write personal letters to these guys saying what it means to them to see their friend, their son, their brother play for England. And I mean, that was quite emotional. It's a good way to get them back. And he's had war heroes in before internationals saying what it means to them, what they go through, and what it makes them feel like when they see an England side play. I don't think, I might be right, Paul, but Wally, we didn't really need that. We felt proud and privileged to be in that position, and we busted a gut every time we played for our country. But maybe is what's needed sometimes in the professional era.
But that was back then when you got 50 caps for your country. You were an international legend. Now it's 120, 130
Wow,
caps.
yeah.
So you can become a little blasé, I suppose, the more you go on. I think with John, I think he's very unfairly treated in his legacy. He did win a Six Nations. He won Test down in Australia. Yes, the World Cup got unhinged. I think the press didn't help him, but that'll be English sides.
It was bad behaviour.
It was
players,
indeed.
wasn't it?
But Jono, I suppose, hadn't had much experience and probably should have been more cutthroat. But we both know from touring and having Jono as a captain, he's an incredibly loyal guy, and maybe was a bit too loyal to some of the players that had been around for the World Cup.
Was, if it was down to CVs, he would never have got that job. The RFU saw it as, here's a big name. The press would give him an easy run for about a year and a half, which happened, and then it would be down to results, which it should be. This is a results-based business. If you start losing, you're open for criticism, but the correct criticism, not just they were rubbish, he deserves to go, sack him.
Why is it, though, that England have had so many problems in Ireland over the last 10 years? You haven't won a Six Nations match here since winning the Grand Slam in 2003. You won the World Cup warm-up in 2011. Given all the success that you'd have had against Ireland throughout the 1990s, what has gone wrong for England in Dublin in the last decade?
Is that Ireland are a better side than England. That's simply how it's been. If you look at the Irish side that's been together for such a long time, look at the centre partnership. Look at Ronan O'Gara still on the bench. O'Connell would be in this, but he's injured. So many players have been around for such a long time compared to the English side. And I'd be very honest and genuine. Since 2003, England haven't been a great side. Not individually. They've not. The 2003 World Cup winning side, there was possibly 7. Half that team would have got into a World 15 around that era. Right now, none of them would. You might just sneak Tuolangi and you might get Dan Cole in there at tight head, but you haven't got those numbers. And Ireland are a good side. If all of Ireland are honest, that side has underachieved, really. Just one Grand Slam from the return of the quality players that the Irish have.
You look at Wales with their 3 over the last decade. So, they certainly have. One thing about English rugby, I think, is, one, there's been this clear out. Also coming over here, experience. I think the Heineken Cup is a big thing. Leicester used to be giants. They haven't been giants for a long time. They've been thereabouts qualifying, but they haven't been the side.
This year's a little bit different with the 3 English teams qualifying, and
you can feel it.
Munster and
that
Ulster.
experience comes into the international camp, and I think that's been a big factor.
Is there a thing, though, for Irish players about playing England, and particularly playing against England in Dublin, that there's a slightly greater concentration or devotion to winning the match?
Well, that would have been the biggest respect you can give to England, but now I think we're a lot more blasé, Jerry. It's
I
just,
think you're looking for the word professional.
We haven't lost in the Six Nations
Wally,
for 10 years
you're
in
looking
Dublin.
for the word professional, not necessarily blasé. If an Irish team was blasé, why they'd get whooped.
Being seriously, no, I think there used to be a case where if you beat England, it didn't matter what happened for the rest of the season, next 2 seasons. That was it.
Those
days are well
Did you
gone.
ever play in a winning team against England, Paul?
Underage.
But not at full international level?
Not at full international, no.
And
No,
was it
we
like?
were actually, I finished up in 2003, and of course we were alongside that great English side that was bubbling under the surface, and came
Oh,
through. So
they'd risen by then, 2003. They were ready.
But it was still was a Grand Slam decider, that game in Lansdowne Road, which was at 42-6 or something. England
But
won that day.
it was the second half that England ran away with that game. The first half was a very, very good competition, and that just proves how even in the day when England was great, it still took that second half for England with a very, very good side to run away with it.
It also took Martin Johnson to upset everybody that day on the red carpet by forcing the president onto the grass.
That's Jono. You need Jono here to really to comment on that
I
one.
think Paul Wallace has given out to him on occasions about that one.
Even as an Irishman, you'd still want Jono as your captain. That is okay. There's certain things that you should do, maybe letters should be done. I think there was a mess up by the RFU, and I personally think that they should never.
It all adds.
But if you've ever been addressing with Jono, and we have, he says no one takes a backward step, and he isn't going to take a backward step, and that's the mentality, and it's a sort of a belligerence. And I think that's one of the things with the English sides, when the likes of him and Lawrence and even yourself, Jerry, will come around. And it was always chests out, and there was this sort of. There was like, I wouldn't say arrogant, but a real confident sort of walk.
You have to have
and
belief.
I think the English players haven't had that for a long time. And I think when you get that sort of what I call that belligerent English approach,
There's
it's
no
a really
cockerel.
difficult
There's
team
no
to beat.
cockerel. I don't mean the coach, but there's no chest out in that side. That's what Lancaster has done. England came second last year. We're a turnover away from possibly winning the Grand Slam. So collectively, they are greater than the individual parts, and I think that's what Lancaster is all about.
Jeremy Guscott and Paul Wallace are still with us. And Jeremy, I want to talk to you about centres, given that you were for a decade the best outside centre playing in this part of the world. What do you make of the way Brian O'Driscoll has continued to prosper at outside centre for Ireland now at the age of 34?
It's nothing short of a miracle. If you think of Brian O'Driscoll back in 1999 when he first broke in on the scene and played incredibly well. 2000 he scored that hat-trick against France. 2001 he scores a miracle try against Australia for the Lions. And then we thought, crumbs, the world's his oyster, he's going to tear everybody to bits. But a few injuries, rebuilt himself, came back a bit larger, came back a bit smaller. But I think in the last few years he's probably been in the best condition outside his injuries. But what I love about Brian O'Driscoll is that he's of a size that people think you cannot compete in that area of the field, yet he confounds some critics. And the way he played last week, after only a few games for Leinster, to come in and I call that pass. It was a pass into the future. It was just like the Matrix. Around him, it was like the rugby equivalent of Piccadilly Circus. Cuthbert was in the middle of the Matrix. He didn't have a clue where he was. Halfpenny had Brian O'Driscoll lined up. Carney had stopped Jonathan Davis, but he still had the intelligence, rugby brain, just to smooth out on that arc, put the pass behind Cuthbert. In fact, it was in front of him because he'd done a pirouette. Like I said, he didn't know where he was. And it's that ball into the future, and there was Zebo just to grab it, go down the touchline 6 yards and score. It was magical. And then the simplicity of O'Driscoll, and this is what he's learnt about rugby, is you don't have to do all those 70-yard runs. You can get near where the ball is, and the camera missed his try. The producer missed his try. The commentators missed his try. That's how sneaky it was. It was brilliant.
Some people have said, maybe as he gets older that he should move to inside centre. But given your own experiences as an outside centre, how difficult is it for a top-class outside centre to readjust to being an inside centre?
In Brian's case, I don't think it would be too difficult. But to be fair, once you've had the freedom of being outside centre, you don't want to come into an area where it goes dark, where limbs are lost in that kind of contact area. You're that much closer to the forwards, and I think Brian O'Driscoll is a better operator in outside channel. He's never been renowned for his slick passing, his offloading. He's been known for his gaps and seizing the opportunity.
If Gordon Darcy is not able to play on Sunday, and we hope that he will be able to play, how much of a blow would that be to Ireland, and how much of an opportunity would that be for England to exploit the inside centre channel? It
depends who comes in, but of course if Darcy's not playing, you've got to remember that we talked about experience and how vital that is in a game like this, and Darcy would be one of those leaders. I think he's rebuilt his game as well. He's more of a defender than he is an attacker these days, and if you lose that key guy in defence, you're going to struggle. But if McFadden comes in, he's going to take his opportunity. The class of players these days that are being replaced, who their replacements are, means there isn't too much of a difference all the time. But you would say, look, O'Driscoll and Darcy have played together 48 times. It's a world record. They smashed me and Carling out of the way with that partnership. But yeah, so he would be a loss. Definitely.
Now, what about prop? Mike Ross. If anything was to happen to Mike Ross, does that mean game over?
I thought Fitzpatrick coming on, he's shown down New Zealand and last week he can scrummage. I think he's a very good option on the bench. I don't think he's very short
For
in
how
match
many
time.
minutes?
How many minutes exactly? And we know that's the reason why Ireland got absolutely smashed by England, was completely 100% through the scrum. And all the talk of Hartley coming in, which you might well do, they're just going, number one, they're going through the scrum. That's the English approach. The conditions probably aren't going to be great, and it's, you know, Marler has got a big. He's a great loose player, but he's got to prove himself in the scrum at international level. Going up against Mike Ross. Well, look, I think Mike is going very well. I think McCarthy's done a big job on the right-hand side of the scrum. I think with the problem with Donica and Paul O'Connell, he appears a more powerful man, and I think he might be just helping to lock out that right-hand side of the scrum. And I just think, by and large, the scrum has improved for Ireland immeasurably. And I think Mike Ross, yes, against Claremont at home, he had a couple of issues, but other than that, you know, I think he's more than capable of taking on. And I think if the conditions are poor, the scrum will dictate.
Can I, Wally, how much of a psychological effect will it be, this game, considering what happened last year in Twickenham? We know
massive.
about the losses that England have had here in the last 5 occasions, but it's close
Huge.
in the memory, isn't it? 12 months ago.
Huge. And yeah, okay, Tom Court, it won't be in the mix. And very unfortunate for Tom Court, because he's a loose head playing a tight head, so it was a bit unjustified. And I don't think it was the Irish scrum fell apart, but there was a real embarrassment when you go back like that. And I think the Irish team will have found, especially when we beat Australia in the World Cup, if you dominated scrum early on, the first few, the referee starts giving penalties to you. Myself and Jerry were just arguing about why a referee gives penalties to different teams when he doesn't know what's
Let me
actually
assure
happened.
you, listeners, we were not arguing, because I would clearly lose that one. It's the world of Wally, right?
But how worried would you be, Paul, that if the Irish team, that they might be, to a degree, almost exhausted by the efforts against Wales, that was a physically far tougher game from the Irish team than England had against Scotland?
I agree. I think Scotland sort of faded where Wales came back, and Wales, just the big, powerful guys they've got. But, you know, there's 8 days. They got back the night of the match, which is a big thing. I remember after a Six Nations game, you needed 2 weeks, and probably one of those weeks to recover was after the night out you'd have.
I heard Zebo had some good recovery, didn't
he?
I heard Zebo had some good recovery down in Cork.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone did recover very well.
Have you ever tried to do anything on a rugby pitch like he did when he flicked the ball up after Jamie Heaslip's
It was
slightly
magic, wasn't it?
misplaced
It was
pass?
so instinctive that I'm not sure how many players ever would have that instinctive thought to do that. I mean, most people would have stopped and collected it, but to flick it up like that in his stride and hardly break stride, it was, isn't that? It's a magical moment. But that's what the whole of the Six Nations has always ever been about: creating memories, and that's one that will stick.
I must say, Rory Best hasn't got a look in for an amazing bit of skill. A block down, being able to blindly catch it when it was coming
And
from
then a
behind
great
him,
pass.
and to miss a double skip pass like that without barely.
Do you know
seeing
why?
it.
Because he didn't score the try.
Yeah, but neither did
And
Zebo.
he's in the front row. Yeah, but that was.
But
it was a prop who scored the try.
It was.
Yeah.
It was because he's in the front row.
Yeah. Well, you got to
Zebo-
give credit where it's due. Yeah.
Wally's world again. I can't argue.
Of course, both of you were on the Lions tour together in '97, which you won, and of course your drop goal, which clinched it, the second
I
test.
did thank
against
Wally
South
for
Africa.
turning up in that game, actually.
But what about for out half? Because we've been mentioning Owen Farrell earlier and the impact, and he's been talked up a lot now by the English press. But is he in Johnny Sexton's league yet?
Again, simply no. The guy has been playing in a successful side with Saracens, but he's been playing at outside centre. He'd be playing a little bit more at fly half. But you got to remember, this kid's 21, 22. He's had 10 probably international games. He's incredibly inexperienced. Johnny Sexton has come through and taken over from Ronan O'Gara now. He's been leading Leinster brilliantly. You know, that cup final against Northampton, where he got the boys charging and they came back and demolished them in the second half, was all down to his half-time chat and his performance. He's come out of his shell. He's come out of the shadow of O'Gara. Now is his time. And no, they're slightly different players. I think you would say Farrell is a better place kicker with his percentages. He just seems to be the Iceman as such a young man, but I don't think he can run a game like Sexton can. He hasn't got the tactical awareness that Sexton has got because of his experience.
And I think a running threat as well. That's what Johnny has. And I think in November there's a seismic change in Irish rugby when Paul O'Connell, Brian O'Driscoll, Rory Best weren't available, and they brought in the new leadership. Look, everyone would love to have seen Brian O'Driscoll go the whole way to the end as captain of Ireland for when he ever did want to retire. But now I think there's even a stronger leadership in that the likes of Johnny Sexton we're getting what he used to in the Leinster changing room and an Irish changing room. Donica Ryan has come in for O'Connell, Jamie, and then you've got, of course, Brian, Gordon Darcy and Rory Best in behind there.
So there's a good mix of youth and experience in the Irish team.
Yeah.
Which perhaps the English team doesn't have that mix.
We haven't got that experience. I mean, there's.
I think Rob Shaw's done very well for Quins in England as captain.
He has, but he's another guy who's got 12 caps.
I think there's 96 caps in the entire English backline as against the 120 plus for Brian O'Driscoll alone.
It's huge. That's a huge difference in experience and understanding of what is the Six Nations. Okay, a lot of these English guys are coming in for their second round of Six Nations, but it's still a huge impact psychologically. It's huge, and they won't have experienced coming away for a Six Nations. The only, not the only way, a big chance I see of England winning is if Ireland give away a lot of penalties. I really, if the conditions are as bad as Wally says, it is going to be about forward power and kicking the goals. And you know that the Iceman can kick his goals. And if Ireland give away as many penalties again as they did against Wales, it's game over, I think.
How will Ireland win, Paul?
If they meet the physical challenge, if they can get front football, the conditions will be poor, but I don't think they'll be that bad that you can't play a bit of rugby.
The Irish like to kill ball.
Every side likes to when they're going backwards.
Look, the simple facts are, Wally, that Ireland gave away a lot of penalties. Yes, there were yellow cards, but Ireland kind of flop on the wrong side. They slow that ball down. That's what they're known for. They hold
only when you're going backwards. That was in the second half.
Well, you can only tackle going backwards. So if you're defending, that's where the tackle comes in. You don't tackle
when you're under real pressure. And I don't think it's that going to be loose game that you're really bodies on the line where you give away a penalty because if you don't,
we get another half an hour just to finish this one.
For the listeners, we better get predictions. Okay, Paul, give us a prediction. What do you expect the outcome
I'm going
to
for
be?
Ireland, and I think Ireland are going to win the championship. Maybe not a Grand Slam, but I think there's a very good chance if they stay fit, the squad with France at home. I really think there's something bubbling here for Ireland.
I never change. As I did last year, I'm going to say Ireland today.
And
I
then
may say something different
Sunday,
on the BBC. But I changed, like I said, like the coastal weather. But the experience, everything says Ireland because of the what's happened in history here in the last 5 occasions they've come here, and the experience that the Irish side have. But I will say if they give away too many penalties, they will lose.
I'm going to leave it there, both of you. Thank you for joining us here on the Guinness Rugby Conversation this evening. Jeremy Guscott, great to have you back on the programme again. And Paul Wallace, as ever, thank you very much for joining us.